So which chapter are we reading today? Today we are reading Miss Honey's story. So today we're going to learn all about Miss Honey. So we're going to find out a little bit more information about Miss Honey. We know quite a lot about her, and we learned a lot about her last chapter, all about where she lives. But maybe today we'll find out why she lives in such a small cottage. So let's get started. Miss Honey's story. "We mustn't hurry this," Miss Honey said, "so let's have another cup of tea, and do eat the other slice of bread. You must be hungry." Matilda took the second slice and started eating it slowly. The margarine wasn't bad at all. She doubted whether she could have told the difference if she hadn't known. "Miss Honey," she said suddenly, "do they pay you very badly at school?" Miss Honey looked sharply. "Not too badly," she said. "I get about the same as the others." So why do you think Matilda's asking if she gets paid badly? Maybe Matilda's thinking, oh, if Miss Honey doesn't earn very much, maybe that's why she's got the small house. "But it must still be very little if you are so dreadfully poor," Matilda said. "Do all teachers live like this, with no furniture and no kitchen stove and no bathroom?" So Matilda, she's very clever, and she's already asked the question, well, do all teachers live like this? Is this the same? "No, they don't," Miss Honey said rather stiffly. "I just happen to be the exception." "I expect you happen to be living a very simple way. You like living in a very simple way," Matilda said. Probing a little further, "It must make the house cleaning an awful lot easier when you don't have furniture or polish or any of those silly ornaments lying round and that have to be dusted every day. And I suppose you don't have a fridge, so you don't have to go out and buy all sorts of junky things like eggs and mayonnaise and ice cream to fill it all up with. It must be terrific, a lot of shopping. You must save a terrific lot on shopping." So Matilda's trying to ask questions. She's trying to find a little bit more about Miss Honey to why she lives in such a small house. So maybe we might find out this chapter. At this point, Matilda noticed that Miss Honey's face had gone all tight and peculiar looking. Her whole body had become rigid, which means stiff. Her shoulders were hunched up high and her lips were pressed together, so tight that she sat there gripping her mug of tea in both hands, staring down at it, as though she was searching for a way to answer these not quite so innocent questions. So Matilda, although she's really clever, she is a bit innocent, because normally you wouldn't say to someone, "Oh, why do you live in such a small house? Are you really poor?" But Matilda, because she is young, she has asked those questions. And if you have a look at Miss Honey, look at her what's called body language, so you can really see that she is strong. She is leaning forward, she's hunching, she's holding onto her tea. She looks really sad, doesn't she? She looks like she's puzzled. How can she tell a small child the real reason for why she lives in such a small house with no furniture? There followed a rather long, embarrassing silence. In the space of 30 seconds, the atmosphere in the tiny room had changed completely. It was now vibrating with awkwardness and secrets. Matilda said, "I'm so very sorry I asked you those questions, Miss Honey. It's not any of my business." At this, Miss Honey seemed to rouse herself. She gave a shake of her shoulders, and then she carefully placed the mug back on the tray. "Why shouldn't you ask?" she said. "You are bound to ask in the end. You are much too bright to have not wondered. Perhaps even if I wanted to ask, maybe that's why I invited you here after all. As a matter of fact, you were the first visitor to come to the cottage since I've moved here 2 years ago." Matilda said nothing. She could feel the tension growing and growing in the room. "You are so much wiser than your years, my dear," Miss Honey went on. "It's like strangers to me. It's like stranger. It quite staggers me. Although you look like a child, you're not really a child at all, because your mind and your powers of reasoning seem to be fully grown up. So I suppose we might call you a grown-up child, if you see what I mean." Matilda did not say anything. She was waiting for what was coming up next. "Up to now," Miss Honey went on, "I have found it impossible to talk to anyone about my problems. I couldn't face the embarrassment, and anyway, I lack the courage," which means if she's not courageous, it means that she's not really brave enough to tell anyone her story. Any courage I had was knocked out of me when I was young, but now all of a sudden I have sort of a desperate wish to tell everything to somebody. I know you're only a tiny little girl, but there's some kind of magic in you somewhere. I've seen it with my own eyes. So Miss Honey says that she feels really comfortable with Matilda, and because she's got some kind of magic around her, that I think that Miss Honey is going to tell Matilda her story. Let's see if we're right. Matilda became very alert. Her voice she was hearing was surely to be crying out for help. It must be. It had to be. Then the voice spoke again. Have some more tea, it said. I think there's still a drop left. Matilda nodded. Miss Honey poured the tea into both mugs and added the milk. Again she cupped her own mug with both hands and sat there sipping. There's quite a long silence before she said, May I tell you a story? Of course, Matilda said. I am 23 years old, Miss Honey said, and when I was born my father was a doctor in this village. We had a nice old house, quite large, red brick. It was tucked away in the woods behind the hills. I don't think you'd know it. Matilda kept silent. I was born there, Miss Honey said, and then came the first tragedy. My mother died when I was 2. My father, a busy doctor, had to have someone to run the house and look after me, so he invited my mother's unmarried sister, my aunt, to come live with us. She agreed and she came. Matilda listened intently. How old was the aunt when she moved in? She asked. Not very old, Miss Honey said. I would say about 30, but I hated her right from the start. I missed my mother terribly, and my aunt was not a kind person. My father didn't know that because he hardly was ever around, but when he did put in an appearance, the aunt behaved differently. So Miss Honey started to tell her story, and this is the important bit, this paragraph here. So she's talking about how that her father was the doctor and he was very busy, and that her mother died when she was 2. So she only has a dad and he works away a lot. So her father asked her aunt to move in with her. So, and it says here, Miss Honey said, but I hated her right from the start. So right from the start, the person that was looking after her instead of her mother or her auntie, she didn't like. And she missed her mother terribly, which is, of course, what you would do. And then it says her aunt was not a kind person. She wasn't very nice. So it says she hated her, she wasn't a kind person, and that when her father did come, her aunt behaved differently. So basically what it means is that when Matilda and her aunt were on her own, the aunt wasn't a very kind person, but when Matilda and Matilda's father were there, the aunt acted differently and she would have been nice. So this is an unusual character. This is a new character we've met, this aunt. So I wonder if we're going to find out a little bit more about her. Miss Honey paused and sipped her tea. I can't think why I'm telling you this, she said, embarrassed. Go on, Matilda said, please. Well, Miss Honey said, then came the second tragedy. When I was 5, my father died suddenly. One day he was there and the next day he was gone. So I was left to live with my aunt. She became my legal guardian. She had all the powers of a parent over me, and in some way or another, she became the actual owner of the house. So now it's telling you that, so when she was 2, her mother passed away, that's in this section, and then up here, when she was 5, so poor Matilda, her father died. And then, so she said it felt like one day he was there and the next day he was gone. And then she was left to live with her aunt. And her aunt became her legal guardian, so that her aunt was in charge of her. But it even says, the way Matilda described it, it was as if she became her power of a parent over me. So she's not saying it in a nice way. So poor Miss Honey, she lost both her parents, and then she's had to live with her aunt who she doesn't like. How did your father die? Matilda asked. It's interesting you should ask that, Miss Honey said. I myself was much too young to question it at the time, but I found out later that there was a good deal of mystery surrounding his death. So this is a key bit where it says there was a mystery, so really no one knows why he died, but they're saying it's very mysterious, it's very odd, and that no one really knows. Did they know how he died? Matilda asked. Well, not exactly, Miss Honey said, hesitating. You see, no one could believe that he would ever have done it. He was such a very sane and sensible man. Done what? Matilda asked. Killed himself. Matilda was stunned. Did he? She gasped. So there's a lot of mystery surrounding Miss Honey's father's death, and apparently it says he killed himself. But Miss Honey, I think, doesn't believe that, because she says that he was very sane and he was very sensible. So she doesn't think that have happened. That hasn't happened. Oh, so this is a really good chapter. We're learning a lot in this chapter. That's what it looks like, Miss Honey said, but who knows? She shrugged and she turned away and she stared out the tiny window. I know what you're thinking, Matilda said. You're thinking that the aunt killed him and make it look like he'd done it himself. I'm not thinking anything, Miss Honey said. One must never think things like that without proof. The little room had become quiet. Matilda noticed, with her hands clasped the mug, that her hands were clasped around the mug, were trembling slightly. What happened after that? She asked. What happened when you were left all alone with your aunt? Wasn't she nice to you? Nice, Miss Honey said. She was a demon. As soon as my father was out of the way, she became a holy terror. My life was a nightmare. So now that Miss Honey's gone to live with her aunt, the aunt has become even worse. And there's really good description, a holy terror. And she also says that her life was a nightmare. And also the other word was she was a demon. So the author, Roald Dahl, has used so many words to describe how mean the aunt was. What did she do to you? Matilda asked. I don't want to talk about it, Miss Honey said. It's too horrible. But in the end, I became so frightened of her, I used to start shaking when she came into the room. You must understand, I was never a strong character like you. I was always shy and retiring. So it means that she was really shy and she wouldn't have said to the aunt that she wasn't being nice to her. Didn't you have any other relatives? Matilda asked. Any uncles or aunts or grannies who would come and see you? No one that I knew about, Miss Honey said. They were all either dead or they'd gone to Australia. And that's still the way it is now, I'm afraid. So you grew up in that house alone with your aunt? Matilda said. But you must have gone to school. Of course, Miss Honey said. I went to the same school you're going to now, but I lived at home. Miss Honey paused and stared down into the empty tea mug. I think what I'm trying to explain to you, she said, is over the years that I became so completely cowed and dominated by this monster of an aunt that when she gave me an order, no matter what it is, I obeyed her instantly. That can happen, you know, and by the time I was 10, I had become her slave. I did all the housework, I made her bed, I washed and ironed for her, I did all the cooking, and I learnt how to do everything. So, poor Miss Honey, not only is she living with someone who she describes as a demon, but by the time that she's 10, it says here that she did everything for her. So, she obeyed her. So, here you go, by the time I was 10, she was her slave. So, she did everything for her. But surely you would have complained to somebody, Matilda said. To whom? Miss Honey said. And anyway, I was far too terrified to complain. I told you I was her slave. So it really shows how Miss Honey, this is why she is so quiet in the way she is, because she was terrified of this person and she had become her slave, which is obviously not very nice. Did she beat you? Let's not get into details, Miss Honey said. How simply awful, Matilda said. Did you cry nearly all the time? Only when I was alone, Miss Honey said, and I wasn't allowed to cry in front of her, but I lived in fear. So this is another good description. She lived in fear. So poor Miss Honey, when she was little, she really didn't have a very nice childhood. She was terrified and she lived in fear. What happened to you when you left school? Matilda asked. I was a bright pupil, Miss Honey said. I could have easily gone to university. There was no question of that. Why not, Miss Honey? Because I needed to be at home to do work. And then, how did you become a teacher? Matilda asked. There's a teacher training college in Reading, Miss Honey said. That's only 45 minutes. A bus ride away from here. I was allowed to go there on the condition I came straight home every afternoon to do the washing and the ironing and to clean the house and cook the supper. How old were you then? Matilda asked. When I went to teacher training, I was 18, Miss Honey said. You could have just packed up and walked away, Matilda said. Not until I got a job, Miss Honey said. And don't forget, I was dominated by my aunt to such an extent that I wouldn't have dared. You can't imagine what it was like to be completely controlled like that. By such a strong personality, it turns you to jelly. So that's it. That's the sad story of my life. Now I've talked enough. So Miss Honey has told Matilda her story, and she's the first person, remember, she's told her story to. And I really like this description, that when you are controlled so much, it turns you to jelly. So basically what she's saying is that she was so scared to do anything that she wanted to make sure she got a job, and she was so controlled that it kind of turned her jelly like wobbly. Please don't stop, Matilda said. You haven't finished yet. How did you manage to get away from her and come and live in this funny little house? Ah, that's something, Miss Honey said. I was very proud of that. Tell me, said Matilda. Well, Miss Honey said, when I got my teacher's job, the aunt told me I owed her a lot of money. I asked her why. She said because I've been feeding you for all those years and buying your shoes and clothes. She told me it added up into the thousands, and I had to pay her back by giving her my salary for the next 10 years. I'll give you £1 a week of pocket money, she said, but that's all you're going to get. She even arranged with the school authorities to have my salary paid directly into her own bank, and she made me sign the paper. So poor Miss Honey, she didn't even get any money each month. So all the money she earned each month went straight into the bank of her aunt. You shouldn't have done that, Matilda said. Your salary is your chance of freedom. I know, Miss Honey said. But when you have been a slave for nearly all my life, I hadn't had the courage or the guts to say no. I was still petrified of her. So how did you manage to escape? Matilda asked. Ah, Miss Honey said, smiling for the first time. That was 2 years ago. It was my greatest triumph. Please tell me, Matilda said. So now Miss Honey's carrying the story on. She's telling her about what happened when she got a job. And now Matilda's asked, how did she escape? And we already know, because Miss Honey said it was her greatest triumph, which means that she really, it was the greatest thing she's ever done was escaping. I used to get up very early and go for my walks while my aunt was still asleep, Miss Honey said, and one day I came across this tiny cottage. It was empty. I found out who owned it. It was a farmer. I went to see him. Farmers also get up very early. He was milking the cows. I asked him if I could rent his cottage. You can't live here, he cried. It's not convenient. No running water or nothing. I want to live here, I said. I'm a romantic and I've fallen in love with it. Please rent it to me. You're mad, he said, but if you insist, you're welcome to it. The rent will be 10p a week, 10p a week. Here's 1 month's rent in advance, I said, to give him, giving him 40p, and thank you very much. How super, Matilda cried. So suddenly you had a house all on your own. Did you pluck up the courage to tell your aunt? That was tough, Miss Honey said, but I steeled myself to do it, so she convinced herself that she was going to do it. One night after I cooked her supper, I went upstairs and packed a few things I possessed in a cardboard box. I came downstairs and announced I was leaving. I've rented a house, I said. My aunt exploded. Rented a house? She shouted. How can you rent a house when you have only £1 a week in the world? I've done it, I said. And how are you going to buy yourself food for yourself? I'll manage, I mumbled, and I rushed out the front door. So she told her aunt finally, but she was really scared. So in the end, she said she mumbled it, and then she rushed out of the front door. Oh, well done you, Matilda cried. So you're free at last. I was free at last, Miss Honey said. I can't tell you how wonderful it was. But have you really managed to live here on £1 a week for 2 years? Matilda asked. I most certainly have, Miss Honey says. I pay 10p rent and the rest just about buys me a paraffin for my stove and for my lamp and a little for milk and tea and bread and margarine. That's all I really need. As I told you, I have a jolly good tuck-in at school lunch. Matilda stared at her. What a marvellously brave thing Miss Honey had done. Suddenly she was a heroine in Matilda's eyes. Isn't it awfully cold in the winter? She asked. So Matilda has said that Miss Honey was marvellously brave. And then the other thing that she said is she's a heroine. Now, what she means by a heroine is, in stories, there is usually a hero of a story. So if it's a male or a boy, they're called a hero. And if it's a female, they're called a heroine. Okay, so Miss Honey is the heroine, so she's like the hero of the story. I've got my little paraffin stove, Miss Honey said. You'll be surprised how snug I can make it in here. Do you have a bed, Miss Honey? Well, not exactly, Miss Honey said, smiling again, but they say it's very healthy to sleep on a hard surface. All at once, Matilda was able to see the whole situation with clarity. Miss Honey needed help. There was no way she could go on existing like this, unidentified. She would be a lot better off. You'll be a lot better off, Miss Honey, she said, if you gave up your job and drew unemployment money. I would never do that, Miss Honey said. I love teaching. This awful aunt, Matilda said. I suppose she's still living in your lovely old house. Very much so, Miss Honey. She's still only about 50. She'll be around for a long time yet. And do you think your father really meant to own the house, for her to own the house forever? I'm quite sure he didn't, Miss Honey said. Parents often give a guardian the right to occupy the house for a certain length of time, but it nearly always gets left in trust for the child. Then it becomes the child's property when he or she grows up. So what they're saying is that unfortunately when parents pass away, that they usually leave it to the guardian. So in this case it was the aunt. And then what they do is once the child grows up to a certain age, then the child will be allowed to have the house. Then surely it's your house, Matilda said. My father's will has never been found, Miss Honey said. A will is somewhere where you write down all your wishes. So after you pass away, you might say that all your money you want to go to this person, your house you want to go to this person. It looks as if someone has destroyed it. No prizes for guessing who, Matilda said. No prizes, Miss Honey said. But if there is no will, Miss Honey said, then surely the house will automatically go to you. You're the next of kin. So that means that Miss Honey is the only person that is the living relative. She is her father's daughter, so the house should go to her. I know I am, Miss Honey said, but my aunt produced a piece of paper that supposedly was written by my father, saying that he leaves the house to his sister-in-law in return for the kindness and looking after me. I'm certain it's a forgery, but no one can prove it. So she's saying she's certain the piece of paper is a fake, that most likely the aunt wrote it. Couldn't you try, Matilda said. Couldn't you hire a good lawyer, make a fight for it? I don't have the money to do that, Miss Honey said, and you must remember that this aunt of mine is very much respected figure in the community. She has a lot of influence, Matilda. She has a lot of influence. Who is she? Matilda asked. Miss Honey hesitated for a moment, and then she said softly, Miss Trunchbull. Whoa! So Miss Honey's aunt is Miss Trunchbull. Wow, that was a real shocker. I didn't see that coming. Wow, what an exciting chapter. So I wonder what's going to happen next. We have only got a few chapters left. We've only got 2 days of Matilda, and we're going to read 2 chapters each day. So we've only got 4 chapters left. But that was a really exciting chapter. I wonder what's going to happen next. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's chapter, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.